Good morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever and wherever you're joining us today. This webinar is on becoming an entrepreneur and some of the different paths to founder and CEO. We are coming in partnership between eCornell and the SC Johnson College of Business, and are excited to hear from three panelists about some of those different avenues to becoming a CEO or founder. We have with us today Chelsea Kingsley, who is the CEO and co-founder of Kingsley Quality Woodworking. She has started this as a women-owned business enterprise, as well as a family enterprise, as she has worked with her husband in building this business and has found creative and useful ways to involve her children and get them excited about this business as well. We also have Daniel Vanderfleet, the Executive Director of the Smith Family Business Initiative. Dan's career spans over 25 years in leadership in public and private sector businesses and organizations, and we're excited to hear a lot of his observations over this time, particularly regarding family-owned businesses. And then we also have Natalie Grillin, the Executive Director of Open Apparel Registry. She'll bring unique insight regarding social enterprises and markets, looking at more sustainable efforts, particularly in the apparel industry, as well as expanding markets from her experience. And so as we'd like to dive in a little bit deeper, I'd like to give each of our panelists a little bit of time to introduce themselves a little bit more deeply and share a bit of their story. So if we could go ahead and start with Chelsea.
Thank you. So Kingsley Quality Woodworking started in 2015, and it was a joint venture between my husband and I. We had both been in business ourselves and had other small businesses before that. And what happened was we looked around at the resources that we had, the skills that we had, and rather than run our two small businesses separately, we decided to join forces and created what we had as a family business so that we could integrate our economic self-expression with the family life that we had. And right from the very beginning of Rev Ithaca Startup Works, I joined Rev in 2015, the year that we started the company. And that really was in order to create and become a part of the local community and to create for myself a network of experts and community resources that I didn't have a connection with. And really, as I grew my company and developed those relationships, it created a voice for the company that emanated from many different sources. And it also helped us be connected with Cornell and Ithaca College to be able to draw from the resources that are right here underneath our own feet in Ithaca. And as we've grown, when we started 5 years ago, our kids were in high school and middle school. And just this summer was the very first time where everyone was old enough to join us for our largest contract ever, doing a historic restoration up there on Cornell campus. So we're seeing the fulfillment of what it is to be able to have a family that is integrated into the community with our company, and to be able to celebrate what it is that we're doing with our community as we grow. And there's nothing more fulfilling than having an integrated life, both family and community, and the resources that we have, and to have what's going on with Kingsley Quality Woodworking really make a difference for the whole community and multiple generations as well.
Excellent. Thank you for the additional color, Chelsea. I'm excited to dive in a little bit more here shortly into your experience.
Thanks.
Dan, would you mind sharing a little bit more of your background?
Certainly. Thank you, Brandon. And hello, Chelsea. Good to see you. Yeah, so I am the Executive Director of the Smith Family Business Initiative here at Cornell University. And probably some of you are asking, why is the family business guy talking about entrepreneurship? And that's a question I've received quite often here at Cornell. The Smith Family Business Initiative was launched in 2014, and I immediately began making inroads with the entrepreneurship community. And I recall quite often posting various events on the Entrepreneurship listserv, which is a very active listserv here at Cornell, a great way of sharing news, resources, and upcoming events. And I would inevitably get a reply back. Why do you keep posting this family business stuff on the Entrepreneurship listserv? And I had somewhat of a boilerplate answer, but said that, entrepreneurship and family business are certainly not mutually exclusive. If anything, they're joined at the hip. And I think, starting with Chelsea in that story is a great example of that. Since that time, we've really partnered with the entrepreneurship community here at Cornell, and I think the relationship is incredibly strong and robust. Many of our students who come from a family business have other ideas in mind, and that might mean a venture outside their own family. That might mean creating something new within the family business. There are many pathways, and I think what we try to implore on the students, both through our club, our courses, and our other activities, is that you can be an entrepreneur in many ways, and there are many pathways, which is really what this topic is about here today. So I look forward to sharing some of those examples and even some resources and data that help to back that up.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Dan. One other call out for our audience is I refer to people like Dan also as an intrapreneur, as he has grown and developed programs and units inside of larger organizations. And so I'm excited to hear more, not just of your observations with those you've worked with on the family business side and the corollary to entrepreneurship, but also some insights as an intrapreneur as we go forward. Last, I'd like to turn some attention over to Natalie to provide some more color and context. I enjoyed getting to know her prior to this panel, and I'm sure you will as well. Natalie.
Thanks, Brandon, and thank you for having me. I am the Executive Director of Open Apparel Registry. It's a global nonprofit focused on democratizing data for the apparel sector, and specifically supply chain data. A lot of problems and issues that the industry faces are hidden in production supply chains in the apparel sector. And we open up that data and make it accessible to all stakeholders to facilitate collaboration, to facilitate interoperability across systems, and to help with innovation and sustainability tracking. The apparel sector, like many sectors right now, is facing down the climate crisis as well as intractable problems around working conditions, modern day slavery. And so we collaborate with a lot of civil society partners, brands and retailers, sustainability measurement and service providers to collate and share data in an open way. We're a global remote organization even before the pandemic. And I have had a lot of learnings around global policies around payroll that I never expected I would have to conquer. And I mention that because I think that there are a lot of things that come up as an entrepreneur that you never expect. And it depends on whether it could be a small business or a large family business that's been around for generations. There's all different sorts of challenges that you face. But I will add to what Chelsea and Dan's shared, that entrepreneurship comes in many different forms. I lead a social enterprise, a nonprofit that I started from scratch. And I've been learning and able to share with peers along the way that there are challenges that are unique to nonprofits, but then there are challenges that are shared across all sorts of startup businesses. So excited to dig into it further, and thank you again for having me.
So thank you very much, Natalie. Excited to dive into a social enterprise discussion as we go forward as well. At this time, for all of those joining us live, I'd like you to direct your attention to the top right corner of your screen. There should be a chat icon. I have prepared a few questions for our panelists, and we'll start there. But utilize that chat function to ask any question of all of our panelists or one panelist specifically. We will be monitoring that and asking those questions live. So start now, continue throughout this webinar asking your questions. For my first question to really kick things off, all of you have very different backgrounds. You've started different enterprises. I'm curious, at what point did you decide that the best decision or way to move forward was to start your own enterprise as opposed to maybe going a more traditional route and working for somebody else? Natalie, maybe we can go in reverse order and start with you, and then Dan and Chelsea.
Yeah, sure. So I think my first experience with entrepreneurship was actually as a college student at Georgetown. There was an entirely student-run corporation there that you were allowed to apply and get hired and move your way up. And I ended up being a general manager at one of the campus snack shops. And I loved it. I loved making decisions. I loved working with my fellow students, collaborating to solve problems. And then I got another taste of it after college when I joined the Peace Corps. The US government drops you in a village and says, hey, work with these people and figure some stuff out. And it was an incredible experience. It helped me develop a lot of resilience, a lot of problem solving skills, a lot of collaboration and listening to stakeholders, which I think is, you apply that to the entrepreneurial context, whether it's a private or a nonprofit, you have to listen to your customers, you have to listen to your stakeholders. They're the ones who are going to tell you how to develop your solution. So Peace Corps gave me a taste of that. And then I was kind of off to the races. I came to Cornell for my MBA, knowing that I was interested in the intersection of business and international development. And it led me to really explore what are the different ways that business can help solve some of these global problems we're facing: poverty, climate change. That led me to applying for a fellowship with an organization called Acumen. Some of you who are interested in the nonprofit and international space may know of it. But I received a fellowship with Acumen, and they invest in social enterprises around the world. I was placed with a company that put me in a fashion supply chain, working with cotton farmers in Uganda. And I was just blown away at how incredible the work was that these farmers were doing and how they were so disconnected from fashion supply chains. And that set me on a path. Basically, since then, I've just been trying to open up data, help stakeholders connect better in supply chains towards improved outcomes for everyone. I have not chosen a traditional career path by any means. I've lived in West Africa, I've lived in East Africa. I'm working now in a remote business where there is no office. But I wouldn't change anything for the world because I've learned so much. And one of my mentors from Acumen, Jacqueline Novogratz, one of her best pieces of advice that she's ever given me, and she says this all the time, is let the work teach you. Sit down, let the work teach you as you go, learn as you go. And I think it's incredible advice for any entrepreneur who wants to get started.
Sometimes there's no one better than yourself to start solving a problem, and that will certainly spur someone into entrepreneurship. Thank you. Maybe actually we can switch and hear a little bit of your reasoning, Chelsea, for starting your own business, going a little bit deeper than maybe your introduction did.
Sure. Well, when I started my company, each time I've started a company, I had a couple of small businesses before Kingsley Quality Woodworking. It was really to meet the flexibility needs that I had for having a family of young kids. And also, I would have to say that it was traditional for me to start my own company. I'm a third generation entrepreneur. There was entrepreneurship all around me. And I just saw how I could flexibly create my own work life and be able to be of service in things that are fulfilling for myself by directly having a relationship with my customers, whoever that is, to be able to see what is the fit between what it is that matters to me, things that I find fulfilling in being engaged in the community with, and being able to do business that way. And really, there's nothing more fulfilling than being able to learn all the facets of what it takes to run a company, and to be able to be engaged with people wherever it is that they're at, and building those relationships, building that skill set that can apply to just about anything. From once you start your own company and you start developing the skills of what it takes to handle everything, especially as a startup, you end up learning a wide variety of things. It never gets boring. It's ultimately incredibly flexible, and we have the runway to be able to do whatever it is that we want with it. So that life of ultimate flexibility and no limits is incredibly, tantalizing and exciting. And the thing is that you get to share it with people. It's a really powerful way to be able to make a difference and be connected with others.
So I love that. Something I was not lucky enough to have is the intergenerational entrepreneur. But it's fun to hear about that from you, Chelsea, and to think that you're continuing that with your children. Thank you. Dan, maybe round us out here and share either from your experience or those components that you've observed as you've worked with family businesses, and the key points of decisions that these family businesses need to take as they shift between generations or opening of businesses and so forth.
Sure. Thanks, Brandon. Yeah, I'll start briefly with my own. As you said earlier, an entrepreneur. Prior to Cornell, I was at the University of Vermont and working in continuing ed, which was, the non-traditional learners at the time. And the university had a family business program there, albeit a very, very small one. The director had left, and I had a very strong relationship with the dean of the business school at the time. And her reason for asking me to take on this family business thing, which admittedly I knew nothing about at the time, was that I knew a lot of business people and that I had a strong network. So for me, it was an opportunity. It sounded like something that was sort of fun, out of the ordinary. And what I really liked about it is I was really a sort of a solopreneur. I mean, I was the dishwasher, the cook, and the waiter. I got to operate very autonomously. And from a business perspective, many of these centers at universities, whether it's family business or entrepreneurship or even sustainability, what few people realize is we do have to operate as a business. Sometimes there's funding available, there might be an endowment available, but more often than not, at the end of the year, we have to pay for what we deliver, and we do that either through raising funds, through charging admissions, or whatever. So you do get in the mindset of being a business owner. And in that case, I very much was one. The opportunity to come here to Cornell presented itself in 2014. And it was a golden opportunity because at the time, a family business center was created with a great gift from the Smith family, but there was no existing center here or other faculty staff. So I was in a true entrepreneurship situation where I could come in, build something from scratch with, essentially what was seed capital. I continued as that solopreneur for many years, and now, we are a staff of 5, which, much like an entrepreneur, has been a challenge for me, going from sort of the person who can do everything and make decisions on my own to being like, maybe I should ask the team, what we should do here. And so that, there's a very similar progression through, building, scaling, and growing. And I think as the director of that center, I need to kind of go from the operator manager more to a CEO type mindset. So I think it's a very similar progression. And, I've been very fortunate to be able to create some programs that have some permanence, well beyond my involvement with them. For family entrepreneurs, I think there's a similar progression of, families are used to making decisions on their own. They love that autonomy and that really kind of control. They're privately owned, so they don't face a lot of scrutiny like a nonprofit or perhaps a publicly owned corporation would. But often as that company grows, and you have more non-family members working for you, especially in management, you might take on an additional investor and suddenly you have co-owner situations. Or we are seeing a growing number of those family businesses have a public ownership component. Walmart is a great example of this, that it's still technically a family business, but there is public stock available. So they too have to sort of manage that dichotomy between, this is what we can do versus, this is where we need to rely on others within our circle.
Wonderful. Thank you for the additional enlightenment, Dan, and everyone. We are continuing to see questions populate. I do have one or two more before we shift to the audience questions. One thing that you all have mentioned in your introductions or as you've shared a little bit more about your journey is the need or maybe the fact that you don't know how to do everything. And as an entrepreneur, as a business owner, at least at the beginning, you wear a lot of hats. You fill a lot of roles. I'm sure our audiences would love to hear what resources have been particularly helpful to you in rounding out that skill set, in being able to be comfortable knowing that you don't know everything now, but that there's maybe resources to develop that knowledge, mentors to reach out to a broader network, for instance. What has helped you really fill those voids as you develop your skill set in running a business?
I'll jump in first. Within the family business space, especially in higher ed, we have something called the Family Business Alliance. And this is essentially a peer group, much like a YPO or a Vistage type group. That network has been incredibly valuable just to see what the other programs are doing, be it successful or not successful, as well as having people that you can turn to maybe on a one-on-one basis or a small group basis and have a conversation about hiring a staff or launching a new program or working with donors. So leverage peers in your network, whatever that network might be, because they are incredibly valuable. Lately, and really over the last year and a half, and I'm not being paid to say this, the eCornell courses have been incredibly valuable because they are, they're quick, they're accessible anywhere you want, but they're also, cover a wide range of areas like critical thinking and executive leadership. And those, I think, are just incredibly valuable. So whether it's something like that or other sort of professional development programs that you can take advantage of, those I think, at least for myself, have been super valuable.
I'd like to jump in from there. I think that it's also important to, as I mentioned, I'm a continued member of REV, but also participated in the Smith Family Business conferences and became a part of the family business community up at Cornell. And the thing is that each group has a different kind of culture. There's a different culture at the different incubators even. And so I think it's really wise to expand your network of people that you stay connected with, because your business and your temperament may call for a different kind of approach. I know that I benefit from the hybrid of the incubator culture and the family business culture. And when I put those two things together, it really gets to open up what's possible for me. The other thing is that the community and the team that I put together is also made up of my accountant and my banker and other older people in older generation of woodworkers in my community. All of those people, being connected with them, just through conversation, I learn and absorb things that I didn't even know that I didn't know. And that's incredibly important and valuable. And the other benefit of developing those relationships anywhere I go is that my vision gets to live with other people. And it gives life to whatever it is that I'm up to. And one of the keys to being able to have that be valuable for me is that that community then also is holds me accountable for what it is that I say I'm going to be creating. And as I declare what we're up to and deliver on what we're up to and get to go back and celebrate with people, my word is action in the world. When I can declare and deliver and let people know what we're up to and what we're creating, I get the input of the community, and then I get to celebrate with them and have them stand for what it is that I'm up to wherever they are.
I would just echo what Chelsea and Dan said about having a community of practice, having a community that shares your values and the way that you want to build a business. I've been fortunate with the Cornell community and with the Acumen community, and now the community that we've built around Open Apparel Registry, people who share your vision, as Chelsea was saying, that's incredibly powerful. And I think that the mentors piece is also huge, whether they be your peer, a peer can be a mentor, or they be sort of an elder statesman or elder stateswoman who've built networks, who've been through building organizations, or who've built projects within corporations or family businesses. Lean on them, ask for advice. Their advice is incredibly helpful in pointing you in the right direction and saving you time if somebody's already done it. And then the last thing I'll say, which I feel like I never hear on some of these panels, but I think is really important to talk about, is if you're an entrepreneur, you have a lot of weight on your shoulders. You have to take care of your mental health, especially with the pandemic and what everybody just went through, with so much being, sort of shuffled, whether that be through a coaching relationship or, taking a friend out for a drink and just being like, I'm slammed, make sure that you're taking care of yourself, because it's a long marathon. It is not a short sprint, right? I think Chelsea knows this, having started multiple businesses. It's so important. So don't devalue that. Take time to take care of yourself.
Thank you all. I've certainly heard very frequently that it can be lonely at the top. And oftentimes, many people will focus on the highlight reel of being a CEO or a founder. They see those amazing moments and they forget how challenging it can be and the many years that it takes businesses to become successful. And so I appreciate all of your insight. We have an interesting question that came in from Nabil that I think will play more towards Chelsea and Dan on this one. He asks, how true is it that the first generation establishes the business, the second generation grows the business, and the third generation kills the business? I think the real question behind it is, how can you avoid these intergenerational challenges and the complication that comes in working with your family?
I'll start with this since I am G1. Let's see. I have a lot of foresight in being able to declare us as a family business because I saw my other generations experience and expertise collapse. It wasn't handed down from generation to generation. And it's sad to see that kind of progress get lost because of breakdowns in relationships and capacity to communicate positively and recognize one another. Really, the breakdown in relationship is where a lot of family resources and family expertise just disappears, it evaporates when those relationships aren't taken care of. And when I really started to look at what could be possible if I look to my previous generations and learn those lessons, even though those businesses are no longer, there's a lot to learn from where I come from and the people that I grew up around. And if I can build the types of relationships that keep communication and engagement open between me and my children, I can accumulate that knowledge and pass that on so they can stand on my shoulders. And then if I create a family culture that alters what it's like to be a part of this family, the kind of way that they can express themselves as a member of the family, I think I have a better chance at keeping everybody engaged in a positive way and having this family grow and be there for one another in any way that is necessary for the economic self-expression that they pull towards themselves as a member of the Kingsley family. I'm more attached to being a family and being a successful group of people that are having fantastic lives than I am committed to keeping us as a woodworking family. Economic, what we do economically can shift enormously. I still have all the freedom I had when I started Kingsley Quality Woodworking to pivot us in a direction that works for us. So that's what I would say as the founder. And I've learned a lot from being around multi-generational businesses up at Cornell and having the opportunity to have those intimate conversations with G3, G4, to be able to know what to watch out for. And as the founder, it's really up to me to set a culture in motion that is something people would select for themselves and has room for people who they are.
Well said, Chelsea. This is the classic shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations, and it exists in many cultures. I won't try to pronounce these in their native tongue, but in Brazil, I think they call it rich father, noble son, poor grandson. In China, it's wealth never survives 3 generations. Italy, it's from stables to the stars and back to the stables again. I think there is this notion that, over time, the generations change, and the family needs to be set up for that change. And I think Chelsea even alluded to this. And you can sort of see the progression happening. You start with the entrepreneur founder. Let's say the business survives and does well. There's a natural inclination to want to pass it on to the children, be that 1, 2, 3 children. Those children grew up in the same household, so they should share pretty similar values. But by the time you get to that 3rd generation, now you're dealing with cousins who grew up with different parents who might have vastly different socioeconomic standing. They might have very different values as a family. Maybe the parents held different positions in the family. So if my parents were the owners, CEOs, and my cousin's parents were maybe a different position, we would see that business completely differently. And you can kind of do that math, 3rd generation, 4th generation, you just continue with more and more complexity. Once you apply a time scale to that, now we're talking 20, 30, 40, 50 years. So for any business to survive that long, they need to plan for not only how family members enter and exit the business, but also how the business is going to be set up for success beyond the industry that they're in, because as we've seen, these industries can sort of come and go. There is some interesting research that does suggest that family-owned businesses actually outlive their publicly held counterparts. So even though only less than 4% of businesses make it to the 4th generation or beyond, a comparable study of publicly owned businesses over that same time shows virtually none of those businesses survive that long. And you can understand why. For a publicly held corporation, they're more focused on profit and creating value for shareholders. And the choice to sell or merge or exit, I won't say is easier, but can be made without the weight of family emotion and family legacy. A family takes that decision to sell a business or leave a business very personally, and they see that as almost a mark on their family name. So while selling the business should be a time of something to celebrate and often can generate, is an event that can create wealth that will benefit the family for generations to come. It's still labeled as a failure in family business literature, or at least in the stats that show from generation to generation, the chances for success do diminish.
Thank you so much, Chelsea and Dan. Two highlights that really stick out to me from that is, in some ways, the compound interest or the compound growth from passing on skills and essentially equity from generation to generation, and certainly the ability to pivot and adjust and innovate as needed through market changes and generational dynamics and so forth. So thank you very much for your insight. Natalie, we'll come to you next. We have a question from Keith Sollers, who's tuning in from here in Ithaca, and he's wondering how you go about fundraising and maintaining momentum to keep your business sustainable, and how that might be different as a social enterprise versus another entity.
Yeah, great question. So we try to hit a 50-50 breakdown in terms of where our funds are coming from. 50% is coming from philanthropic funders, and that's a variety of family foundations built on top of family businesses, to government funding as well. And then we do receive some funding from corporate sponsors of our work as well, who benefit from our open database. And then the other 50% is recurring revenue subscription to our API connection. So businesses who want to access our data conveniently and have that automated connection to our dynamic database can pay an annual subscription fee for that service. What works nicely about that is it just stabilizes the business a bit more. You're not reliant on getting grant funding entirely. You do have that sustaining incoming source of revenue. But what I also like about having the revenue generation from API subscriptions is that you're listening to your customer. You're listening directly to the people who are using your data on a day-to-day basis and getting feedback from them, not only through customer service, but also whether or not they pay for your platform. So it's a nice hybrid way of accounting for the social impact that we deliver, that our philanthropic funders are really interested in, and balancing that with the customer need for our data for more day-to-day business uses.
So thank you, Natalie. And one of the other components that I found interesting that we talked about prior to this is maybe the change in dynamic of the attitude behind those funds, whereas as opposed to focusing on instant profitability or a shorter time horizon, they tend to focus on a longer time horizon. Do you want to speak to that just for a few moments?
Yeah, so there's sort of two ways of thinking about this, and you could have like a whole class on philanthropic funding and where foundations are putting their money towards, how family foundations are structuring their wealth and giving back to causes that they care about. But in brief, I'll say there's two ways of thinking about this. One is the impact capital, or the patient capital, as it's sometimes referred to. That can be investments in nonprofits or in for-profit social enterprises. And rather than a VC horizon of 10x over a couple years, right, like 3 to 5 years, you're looking at a long-term investment of 10 to 15 years of, we believe in this idea. We know that the problems that this social enterprise or this nonprofit are trying to solve for take time. There are a lot of external factors. So we're going to sit down with them and commit to a long-term partnership, knowing that we're going to, for-profit enterprises, potentially get a return on our investment, right? And for nonprofits, it takes time to try and have an impact on people's lives or on the planet. So that's one sort of way of thinking about it. The philanthropic space is changing a lot. I think there's a lot of reckoning happening around the sort of the restrictions that donors put on funding. A lot of capital is called restricted grant capital, and sort of the holy grail for a nonprofit is unrestricted funding. And that's what you want to work towards, where you can I can spend this money the way that I see fit to be, a functioning, sustainable operation. So there's a lot of conversations happening about that. Mackenzie, oh my gosh, no longer Bezos, but previously Bezos, Jeff Bezos' wife, has given away a lot of her funds, unrestricted. Here's the money, go do what you see fit with it. It's sort of prompting these conversations in the philanthropic space around how money should be allocated and what should be the reporting around it. So TBD, but we're fortunate to receive some quite a bit of unrestricted funding as well as some restricted.
So thank you for that. I know we have some listeners that are certainly interested in nonprofits and social enterprise, and hopefully that adds some color for them. This next question is really geared to all of you. Feel free to come off mute when you're ready to respond. But we've got a question from Paola. Hopefully I'm pronouncing these names correctly. But she asks maybe what different mindset you would need to have to be an entrepreneur, and how that might differ from those who are going to be a top performer in a corporate environment, for example. What's been your experience, either personally or from those in your network or those that you've observed, how that mindset maybe needs to be a little bit different?
I can jump in with one thing right off the bat, and then I'd love to hear what Chelsea and Dan have to say. Risk loving. You have to love risk. You have to be uncomfortable with risk. You don't know where your paycheck's coming from sometimes. And you have to be creative. You really have to be creative, liking to look at problems and thinking through what are the different ways that we can tackle this in the most efficient way possible, because you're probably operating with limited resources, at least when you start. And that creative piece can fall into your own profile too. In other words, if you're starting your own business, you may need to consult on something for a while, or you may need to have a part-time job while you're also working on your business. I consulted for many years while building Open Apparel Registry. So that factors into that creativity and liking risk and being comfortable with that.
I'll jump in from there, Natalie, and second everything you said for sure. The risk part is a big deal. Also, there is no part of the business that you get to not know. Like, you really have to understand every facet of the business. Even if ultimately you end up handing parts off, accounting off, for example, or sales off, you still have to be accountable for the results of anybody that you hire. So that's one of the frameworks is be prepared to not know and learn, and not know and learn, and expand and grow, and be willing to take on where you fall short as an opportunity to discover and teach yourself. Because the practice of not knowing and taking on that discovery and expertise over time, when you do that over and over and over again, the risks go down. You start to feel more comfortable with being on the precipice of the gap, where you don't necessarily know what's next. But once, I know for myself, once I have been at the gap and not known what's next, and then bridge that multiple times, it's just not nearly as nerve-wracking anymore, because I'm practiced at handling the gap. And 2020 for me was an incredible gift, because it was the toughest stress test I could have imagined for my company. To be able to get through that successfully, I get to sleep a little more comfortably at night, because I just saw, well, we've got the skills, the resources, and the community to deal with what happens. And that's something that is, that kind of trust, self-trust and capacity for an entrepreneur opens up the landscape and provides a little bit of comfort dealing with the risks that show up, like Natalie mentioned.
Back in January, we were doing a webinar conversation with John Gordon, who's a Cornell alum, and he's got great books, very uplifting, very simple reads, mostly on the power of positive thinking. And we had this exercise where, for 2021, remember where we were 2021, the vaccine hadn't really been rolled out yet. We were still at the height of the pandemic, and we were just looking for something to smile about. And we said, pick one word for 2021 that you will focus on throughout the year. And my word happened to be persist. And I think as an entrepreneur, that's an important lesson, whether, given Chelsea and Natalie's examples or working within higher ed, sometimes things take a little longer than you want them to. And even though, I've extolled the virtues of being autonomous here, you're never fully autonomous. You need to rely on your team members. You need to rely on whatever organization that you are in or the funders that you work with. Sometimes the pace of business can be kind of slow, especially in higher ed. So be persistent. And then finally, I would answer the last year and a half have been really a great sort of petri dish for innovation. I think we've all had to look at how we do business, and here at the Smith Family Business Initiative, our jobs is to convene people, bring people together so that they can learn from each other, as Chelsea shared. And hopefully share, what we need to share about family business. Well, we haven't really been able to gather together in person for a year and a half. So these types of forums have become very important for us as well. And translating what we do into an online format has been critical. And also it's, the many hats. You do have to be a bit of a generalist. My day can be filled with a student that comes in and presents with a family issue. So I have to be part psychologist. Sometimes I'm dealing with faculty members, so I have to be part researcher and academic, or sometimes it's a team issue or an organizational issue for that we have to tackle. So you kind of have to be nimble and be ready to tackle any one of those problems to the best of your ability, and learn when maybe you're outmatched on a certain subject, and I need to go get some help on this.
Excellent, thank you all. Very insightful. Dan, while you're unmuted, I want to pick your brain on something that came up previously, and that was family foundations and how they're often built on family businesses. I'm sure there's a lot of nuance there that I'm not aware of. Mm-hmm. Would you mind shedding some more light there?
Yeah, Natalie referenced this earlier, and we use the term family business very broadly. I think people hear the word family business and they might think, the corner store, College Town Bagels, or, the hardware store. And that's often where the business starts. But what we often refer to is this term called either family enterprise or family entrepreneurship. And what we see is as that business grows, they might enter into additional businesses, either by acquiring. Then they often reach a point where, perhaps that wealth begins to accumulate, and they look to do something good with that wealth. And this is where family foundations come in. Sometimes these are created as the business still exists, and it might complement the work that the business is doing. Other times a family foundation comes into being after the business is sold. And now the family needs to, have a strategy for preserving and essentially distributing that wealth. And there's a lot of interesting thing happening in this space right now, especially the events we've seen over the last year and a half, where wealth inequity has come into full play, and a lot of issues around race inequity have come into full play. So we are seeing the next generation have a much more important and possibly stronger voice in how families distribute that wealth and have impact with that wealth. A lot of the same rules of family business apply. And by that, I mean, you're still working amongst generations. You're still trying to preserve something for the future generation. So even though the company's not making a product or a widget anymore, the focus still needs to be the same around how do we integrate our family values into this? How do we help this cross generations? And how do we help this survive into future generations? Great example of this is in our neck of the woods, Welch Allen. They sold the family business after 100 years for over $2 billion. As a family, nobody, they're not looking for sympathy. They did very well, but now what's the rallying cry for the business? And it's become the foundation and their ability to have impact in their local community. And each family chooses that impact differently. It can be infrastructure needs, it can be societal needs, it can be sustainability. And there's a lot of these resources out there. They're sometimes hard to find. So this is where the value of networking is really important. I'm sure Natalie knows how to do this. A lot of these family foundations don't have websites. So it's really key to learn how to knock on their door and make inroads into those foundations, because they do phenomenal work with what they give back.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Dan. As we're rounding out our webinar, we continue to have questions come in. Thank you so much. Natalie and Chelsea, we've had a number of questions come in regarding how you adapt and innovate. How do you ensure continued success despite uncertainty? And I think what a lot of those are getting at is maybe how do you define success? How do you communicate or adapt your vision despite challenges such as COVID or other uncertain aspects of your business? So in each of your enterprises, how would you define success, and how has that helped work through those ambiguous situations?
For a nonprofit, you have a mission. It's clearly outlined. It's in your organizing documents. It's on your website. You have to give it to the IRS when you apply for 501c3 status. And so we use that as our North Star. For us, it's to map every apparel facility in the world and provide data around it to facilitate interoperability and collaboration. And all of our goals, our 5-year strategy, our KPIs, how we measure performance against our goals, all tie back to that. How are we doing in terms of collaboration? How are we doing in terms of interoperability? How are we doing against, our key metric of how many facilities are in the database? But that's kind of a very an operational answer. I think for me, personally, you can get bogged down with a lot of different things during your day to day. And all of a sudden you're like, when did I haven't spent any time on big picture thinking or strategy. So you really have to think about what are the key things I have to focus on? What are the key goals that are most important over the next 3 to 6 months, over the next month, over the next year, and make sure that you are delivering against those core, what is most important. You have to drill down. And then the only other thing I would say is that what helps me sort of navigate through uncertainty and adapt is just to listen. I can't say this enough, listen to your customers, listen to the contacts, talk to your stakeholders. We generate these really great case studies of how our data is being used. And I always make sure to read those as soon as they come through. Have a Slack channel about customer feedback. If you're for profit, what are customers saying? What are the good things? What are the bad things? Because at the end of the day, you have to be solving a problem for people, for them to keep coming back to you. And you need to know what that problem is and if you're solving it.
I would say for us too, there are different facets for success. One is always going to be taking care of our customers and having them be grateful to be working with us and having found us. So there's that, along with profitability, making sure that there's always that line is always growing, being interested and engaged in that. And, on a very simplistic level, it's, am I enjoying my life? And being able to, there have been a lot of jobs over the years that are part of running the company that I don't particularly enjoy that much. And so it's a matter of figuring out how to increase the actual day-to-day activities that I'm doing to be more of the things that I enjoy and less of the things that I don't, whether that's outsourcing some of those parts or tweaking the business. Over the years, we at one point were looking at focusing on doing a lot more work with contractors. It turned out that what that looks like on a day-to-day basis is going through massive, documents, blueprints, and doing takeoffs. Well, turns out I don't like doing that. So rather than turn myself into somebody who's an expert at doing takeoffs and going through blueprints, we pivoted a little bit and shifted our focus back to places where we get to do what we enjoy doing. And I think the other part is also moving towards the customers that we enjoy. Like, there are a lot of different customers that we can work with, and we've gotten clear how a delightful customer makes life so much better. And really, we can have a say about that. As we're experts in our field and are sought after, we have more options to choose from, to have our lives be enjoyable. And like Natalie's talking about, there's the fulfillment of what the company is up to, and then there's the fulfillment of what it is to live your life with your family on a day-to-day basis. And my intention is always to have my head hit the pillow with the relationships of my family in a positive state, being connected, and having a future that we're interested and engaged and excited for. Because ultimately, it's that future that we're creating for ourselves and our company that has today be enjoyable. So there's always attending to that on a regular basis.
Excellent. Thank you both so much. Well, we are nearly up on time. I'd like to give you each about 60 seconds for any parting thoughts, words of encouragement for our audience. We'll go ahead and go Dan, and then Natalie and Chelsea.
I was worried you were going to start with me. I wanted to be the guy that said, I agree with everything they said. I think for me, it's about the connection between family and entrepreneurship, that as an entrepreneur, the resources you're going to pull on and the strings you're going to pull on first, more often than not, are the family strings, whether that be access to capital, access to physical infrastructure, access to networks. The data show that nearly 77% of all entrepreneurs access resources within the family. I'll finish by saying family businesses are just entrepreneurs that succeeded. So it's really impossible to deconnect the two of them. So when you hear the term family business, don't think small, don't think fighting, think creative, think persistent, think very future thinking. Thank you.
I think I would just share that, the theme of this talk is that entrepreneurship comes in many different forms, whether it's through a family business, whether it's a nonprofit, whether you're an entrepreneur within an organization. There are lots of different ways to flex that entrepreneurial muscle of being creative and learning as you go. I loved what Chelsea said about, you're always learning, you're always growing, you're becoming, not an expert in everything, but a generalist and trying to be as much of an expert as you can be. So it's a rewarding path. It is one that requires resilience. It is one that requires creativity and flexibility. And it can mean failure. It can. We didn't talk about that, but it can. I have a failed organization behind me in my past. So, be open to the experience and knowing that every challenge you face makes you stronger. And please, I don't know if they're sharing our contact information, but if anybody wants to chat, as we said, your network and your community is one of the most important things. So please feel free to reach out. Thank you.
I'll end with saying, practice speaking your vision. Get out there and talk to people, include your friends and your family and your community in what you're creating. And as you speak, what will get sorted out is the reality of what you're creating. ultimately. And the value of developing the pitch and the vision for yourself, that it gets things sorted out. It includes the people who matter to you in what you're up to. And it really does bring the enterprise into being by exploring that and being able to paint a picture with words so that it really lives for other people will have it be more real and more possible for you.
Amazing. Thank you again so much, Dan, Natalie, and Chelsea, for joining us, sharing your experience and insight today. To all of our audience, thank you for joining and learning alongside with us for your questions. This has been recorded, so you can reference it again on eCornell, and we look forward to seeing you back at future webinars. Thank you all.